The American 1920s, now commonly referred to as the Roaring Twenties, began a cultural movement known as the Jazz Age. During this time, many innovations in both song and dance emerged. The birth of jazz is often accredited to Black Americans, but it was soon adopted by America's white middle class. Jazz became characterized by a meshing of African American traditions and the ideals of the white middle class society. Jazz became extremely popular in cities such as New York, Chicago, and New Orleans, and they quickly became central hubs for the movement. New York specifically with the Harlem Renaissance. Dances developed during the Jazz Age include the Charleston, the Cakewalk, the Black Bottom, and the Flea Hop. Most of these were developed by the African American community, and they instantly became very popular. Jazz bands began popping up all across America, and they played all venues, from small diners to large dance halls such as the Savoy in New York City and the Aragon in Chicago. Radio stations played a huge role in the eruption of the Jazz Age. Their development allowed the new tunes to be heard by listeners across the nation. The older generation objected to the Jazz Age, referring to it as vulgar and a moral disaster. On the other hand, the younger generation loved the newfound freedom that they achieved through jazz. In the midst of this rapid cultural shift, icons began to emerge, establish themselves, and leave their imprint in music and jazz history. Sidney Bechet and Louie Armstrong were just two of the men who rose to stardom during the Jazz Age, and they are two of the greatest musicians that America has ever known. Sidney Bechet was born on May 14, 1897, in New Orleans, Louisiana. His father had a passion for music and encouraged all of his children to study and appreciate it. Growing up in New Orleans, the center of the music world, it didn't take Sidney long to become exposed and familiar with jazz and the culture that accompanied it. At the age of 6, he took his brother's clarinet and began practicing. He quickly learned that he had a very impressive ability to learn any instrument very quickly. He became very talented at the clarinet at a young age. He could learn any instrument by simply teaching himself the basics. Once he discovered his abilities, it did not take him long to begin developing his own music styles. Sidney became known for his eccentric personality. His approach to playing jazz was extremely different and far-fetched. He became known for his innovative styles, flexibility, and distinctive vibrato gauges in his music. His career lasted over 4 decades, during which he enjoyed traveling the world, introducing his music to new people, and making records. Around 1914, Bechet hoped for a wider exposure to jazz music, so he traveled to New York City, partnering with Will Cook. He then traveled to London, where he performed in the Royal Philharmonic Hall, giving an impressive performance that was well received by the audience. London was where he first became familiar with the saxophone, which quickly became his preferred instrument. In the early 1920s, he recorded some of his earliest tracks, such as the Wildcat Blues and the Kansas City Man Blues. These recordings are known to feature some creative ragtime elements, with distinctive use of 12 and 16-bar blues melodies. Throughout his life, he invoked a vibrant sensation in jazz music and composed some of the most famous tunes, alone and with the aid of musicians he met on the tours. He turned the clarinet into an instrument that could be played solo, and through his work with it and the saxophone, along with his dominant playing style and creativity, he helped inspire a revolution in 1920s music.
The next number we're going to swing for you is one of the good old favorites. That's Dinah, look out there, boy. Are you ready? Look out.
Like Bechet, Louie Armstrong was also born in the major music city of New Orleans. He, however, was born into a poorer family, and after a mishap he had on New Year's Eve when he was 12, involving him discharging a firearm into the air, he was sent away to a reform school where he learned to play the cornet. After his release at age 14, he worked many odd jobs, including selling coal from a cart, unloading boats, and selling papers. At this time, he did not own his own instrument, but he adored jazz, and he loved to listen to bands at the local clubs such as the Funky Butt Hall. Jazz legend Joe "King" Oliver was his favorite. After spending so much time in the clubs, the two became acquainted, and Joe acted like a father figure for Louie, even giving him his very first cornet and instructing him on how to play. In 1917, he joined King Oliver's band that played in dive bars of the Storyville section of New Orleans. In 1919, he left New Orleans for the first time and went to St. Louis, where he joined up with Fate Maribel's band. His new band played on Mississippi riverboat lines, but when the boats were out, he played regular gigs at local bars and diners on land. In 1921, he returned to New Orleans and played with many odd bands there. He also played in parades, on bandstands, and in orchestras. Louie Armstrong was the first great soloist of the 1920s. However, his jazz style had a more collective sound, and was better when played as part of an entire band playing in harmony. His influence was pervasive throughout the course of his long career. He created a lasting legacy for the jazz age. Earning himself the nickname Satchmo or Pops, he laid the first real foundation for 1920s jazz.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, bright blessed days, dark sacred nights. And I think to myself,